Elevator, and I am super excited to have a special guest today with me, Simeon Dukac, who is a founding partner at One Way Ventures, decades of angel investing, and a really interesting blackjack history. And also been a great supporter for me in my early days starting Class Tag. And I'm excited to welcome Simeon to the show. Hi, Simeon.
Hi, Vlada. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. All right. Um, Fantastic. Well, I think the best way to start is just to hear your story in your own words. I can do it justice. I actually found out about your um, amazing background after you became an investor, and I was really fascinated by that. I was like, how come I didn't know that before? So I, I want to hear it all.
Well, I don't know which part you found most amazing, but my general, I guess, chronological life bio is I was born in Moscow in the Soviet Union and was brought to the US as a kid by my parents in '79. Studied computer science at Columbia and MIT, and did in fact play with and run one of the MIT blackjack teams, which was my first startup and also, I suppose, my first investment fund. But got fairly bored of it after a couple of years and started a software company in '97 called Fast Engines, which helped bring enterprises dynamic applications to the web in a simpler way. Um, Ended up selling that a couple of years later and starting some other things, but also writing my first angel checks in the '90s. And over time, I realized that I really prefer the investing side.
Mhm.
I love startup founders. You know, they are my customers. You have to know your customer in any activity, right? And you have to care about your customer. And so that's what I kind of leaned into and did more and more often. Eventually, had some success and was able to increase the activity even further. Um, and then in, I guess, 2014, I was asked to take over and run the Techstars Accelerator in Boston, which I did for a few years before starting One Way Ventures.
Awesome. And it's coming up on 6 years or so, right? Of One Way Ventures as well.
Yeah, 7 years. We started in 17.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and we
Amazing.
are finishing up this year investing out of a $57 million second fund, and we'll be raising the next one as well.
Awesome. So lots to share. So I imagine you are coming up probably on a few hundred portfolio companies or investments.
Oh, altogether, yeah. I mean, if you count my angel investments in Techstars, it's got to be over 300 or maybe 400. It's a lot.
Amazing. So lots to share. But before we dive into sort of the practical steps and advice for founders, I really wanted to spend a moment on immigrant founders specifically. Some of the stats now say that 80% of unicorn companies have at least one founding member who is a immigrant, and you certainly, in a lot of ways, were a trendsetter. And still, there is a handful of funds, right, that are focused on immigrant founders. So what brought you to it other than you being an immigrant? Was it a blackjack kind of bet where you calculated the probability?
No, it was much more about me, A, being an immigrant, um, and B, wanting to work with other immigrants, feeling like I was sort of part of a group. I didn't at the time really feel like I belonged to any nation. You know, I wanted nothing to do with Russia, where I was born, and had little connections to Israel, where my ethnic ancestors lived, um, and likewise found life in America quite nice and liked some things about it, but never felt like it was my country. Since then, ironically, I've sort of discovered my roots in Ukraine, where where my
You
ancestors
learned the
also lived
language. It's
for many
impressive.
generations, and I
It's
learned the
impressive.
language, and I helped build a pretty substantial nonprofit there. Um, but at the time I was starting One Way, it really was about, recognizing that these disparate immigrant tech communities in the U.S. could actually be thought of as like a single people. And when you join forces, you become very strong. I mean, as you pointed out, I'm not sure it's quite 80%, but I guess it depends on how you define an immigrant and founder. But it is over half by any measure. Over half of all the unicorns, right, have immigrant founders. And so, yeah, it sort of says that you might do well with the VC fund simply by having that as a filter. But that was sort of a consequence, not a goal. The goal was to combine these disparate communities to encourage immigrants from different countries to feel like they're part of a greater whole, and to then be a very strong group, sort of with an advantage. I felt like people shouldn't be asking how much our coming to a country like the US helps the US economy. It helps us a lot, but to me, that's not the point. People should be welcome here because it's our right to go wherever we please and do whatever we want in peace and create value. Like, we shouldn't be questioned based on the random circumstances of our birth, of whatever papers, passports. Like, it shouldn't really matter. What should matter is who you believe yourself to be, right? And so that was the real motivation. I knew that a venture capital fund, is the type of thing I want to start. I wanted to start something important, meaningful, global, and like a company. You just do a lot better when you have a real mission that drives you, right? It just unites your team, founders, employees, customers, like everybody, and it energizes people. You work harder, people just achieve more when they're doing it for some purpose other than just like maximizing financial returns, right? So to me, a fund is a type of business. At the end of the day, it's not like a huge scalable business, right? But it's still a business. And so I knew I needed a mission. I wasn't going to ever consider starting a venture fund without a mission. And kind of realized, in fact, somebody suggested the idea when I was at a protest, right when Donald Trump was just elected. They weren't letting people who were born in certain countries who had visas to actually enter for a few days until the courts reversed it. And I was there protesting, and then someone I knew, an angel investor in Boston, and Joe Caruso, suggested that I start a fund with this mission. And there was actually one other fund. To this day, as far as I know, there are only two funds that really focus on that story, the affinity group as well as the filter, right? And the fund that was already existing was Unshackled, which does this like very early first check, first time founder, pre-seed only. And so we went for the seed stage, one stage later. And so, yeah, we still cooperated with them a lot. We actually invested in their fund. And it's been great. We learned a lot, and we got better at various aspects of venture. It is quite different than either angel investing or an accelerator like Techstars. But the one thing we kind of managed to nail right from the beginning was this immigrant idea. It's been very powerful, and it really is the main thing responsible, I think, for whatever success we've shown thus far.
Amazing. So not only companies have missions, funds have missions too, and you certainly found yours, and it certainly is a great contribution to ecosystem and overall community. And I know through the portfolio work you are doing, I met a number of friends that became really close friends to me, and we are still in touch and supporting each other. As well. So that's a big part of belonging and having that support network as well. So thank you. So Simon, if we go into sort of fundraising process, right, for early stage folks, maybe they are, they have some initial traction. They're starting to think about raising their first round. And for many folks, actually raising pre-traction is not in the books. Would you agree with that? It's really, really hard.
Well, not exactly. Yes and no. I think for most businesses, raising equity capital makes no sense in general.
Yeah.
And for many other businesses, it does make sense to raise equity capital, but it makes no sense to ever talk to venture capital funds, right? Because they target a particular kind of growth trajectory that is not suitable for everything, right? And so I would say, the stage at which you might want to approach venture capitalists or any investors is much less dependent on the exact amount of traction and much more dependent on exactly what kind of business you're going to be building, and whether you have some convincing arguments for making the investor see that you're sufficiently likely to generate such large returns that it would make sense within the scope of their fund, right? Traction is one possible way to show that.
Right.
I would say, most of the time, in my experience, it is not the primary or the best way, especially with the better investors. Even at various stages, right? Even at Series A stages, it's often not about the exact historical result. It's always much more about your future growth than your past growth, right? And it's more about growth than size,
Right.
but it's actually entirely about the future. And so, drawing like a straight linear extrapolation is rarely the right way to do it. Businesses almost never have sufficient moat or defensibility that you can project the past
Right.
result going forward. Things always change along the way. I would say your success in the previous endeavor is actually more relevant. But the most relevant thing is an actual vision of how you're going to do it, like understanding what will drive your outsized growth, why the market will be eventually large enough. And generally, I would say uh, the media, the press often portray fundraising as a goal itself, as if the money that you raise from venture capital was some kind of prize, right?
Mhm.
Or some kind of signal of
Right.
worthiness. And it's not at all true. What it's a signal of is that you're in something that could be very large, and you lack the ability to get there without taking on this debt.
Right.
I mean, you often increase your level of risk. You increase um, the burden on you, uh, since at the end of the day, it is generally still a form kind of like that. It's a head, as you know extremely well, right?
Right.
It is a head in the preference stack, right? So uh, it one shouldn't, even when one really needs it, one shouldn't generally look at it as a goal. It's an important like mental distinction. I think one should look at it as a price, a necessity. You have competitors that are spending a lot of money and moving fast, and you must therefore raise the big round and take more risk by moving quicker, by hiring people quicker, and probably making more mistakes along the way. But it's the only way you can get there. Otherwise, it won't work. That's a great reason to do it, right? And there are other reasons, but
Absolutely.
and yeah, sometimes you're in a position where you just can't get started because initial revenues are too far and there's no bootstrapping potential at all. And you have to raise some money, at the very, very beginning, in which case you would have to do it based on your ability to communicate your vision, your passion, your track record, right? Your team, etc.
So, just to summarize, Simona, I think that was a kind of great introduction that majority of businesses don't need venture, shouldn't look for venture funding because it's just the wrong thing to do. So, the criteria for those that should be raising or can consider raising as a means towards an end, right? Not in a prize itself, but as a way for them to actually reach that potential, right? So that's the large market size, right? Their vision to pursue that large opportunity, and perhaps a competitive space where that's required, right? Would you say those are kind of three things, or anything else that's
Yeah, and of course the specific market and the size of it, it varies with the investor, right? It has to be a
right?
fit. You ideally, if you are talking to the right investor, you shouldn't have to really convince them, right? Like they're gonna want to invest, and
Right.
you're gonna be choosing which fund to take. And in fact, confident founders that the stronger founders I see generally spend quite a bit of effort trying to figure out whether they want to allow the investor to invest before they have any investor that's committed. So it's
Right.
kind of paradoxical, right? So you would think that they should want to work with anyone, right? But part of what makes a founder strong is a belief in their vision of the future and the confidence that they will in fact get there. So the stronger founders just assume that multiple funds are going to go invest
Right.
even when none of them have, and they recognize that if they haven't been able to get investors interested, it's probably on them to find the right investors and to tell the story in such a way that they can convince the investor. Because otherwise, otherwise they've already made a mistake because the founder invests the most, right? The
Right.
founder
Right.
invests so
There's
much of their
all eggs
life,
in one
so much of their
basket.
life,
Right.
right? And so really, if the investor is right, that
Mhm.
this isn't interesting for them, the founder might question whether it's interesting for the founder, right?
Well, why are you investing? Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, generally speaking, if smart investors that know the space you're in, understand the business, are not investing, um, you gotta try to sort of figure out why not. The
Right.
default should be that people should want to invest.
Yeah, but if we go back, and I think that there are kind of from those investable ones, right? There are two types of businesses. One that is trying to do better something that's already been done, right? So they're trying to do it cheaper, faster, easier, etc. Right? Now with especially AI, there are a lot of opportunities to right optimize things and speed up things. Um, and and then there are other businesses that are just establishing new categories, right? And so, let's say Airbnb was a classic example where every investor told them no in the early days, right? And then until they sort of had more proof and the market kind of caught up with them. How do you think about kind of those two things, like doing existing things better or something brand new?
Well, it comes down to the same thing. I mean, what is proof, right? Uh, how did those kids at the time, I guess Brian Chesky was a kid. I think it's a fair term to use. I wouldn't use it now, right? Um, how did they know that the thing would work? Why did they believe that it was work, right? I think they themselves had to do their early experimentation. I think they went to New York from San
Mhm.
Francisco to try it there or whatever. I think it wasn't so much about showing revenues or whatnot, right? It was actually figuring out that this is the thing they actually wanted to pivot to. Because I was doing all kinds of other stuff before, and
Right, right,
uh, smart investors like Paul Graham already believed that they were like very talented founders. They showed some sparks, some passion, some ability to convince other strong people to join them. They had all that, right?
right,
But they hadn't quite figured out the business right away. And so it's really part of their process of discovering the thing they wanted to do was the thing that created the evidence,
hmm,
right? But in other cases, often it's a question of like real founder market fit. Like we really look for that. We want to see a lot of that. We like that as a differentiator, right? Like a team that's particularly suited to figure out what exactly people in the market really want, what they actually care about, what's a big enough pain point for them that it's going to make all the difference in the world. And yeah, I mean, some things are harder. Like a marketplace is actually another example of a reason why you might need to raise larger rounds earlier, right? Because when you have a two-sided marketplace, like the liquidity, the amount of supply on each side, in the case of Airbnb, it's the number of housing units or the number of people looking to rent them, matters sometimes more than anything else, any other innovation you can create on the subject, right? Because if you start marketing a marketplace without sufficient supply, on one side or the other, people will be very disillusioned no matter how cool it seems, and
right,
they'll not come back to check it out again because they'll just assume it's not the pleasant experience trying to use it because there's no apartments in the area you're trying to go to, and that's that.
yeah.
So in things like in cases like that, you have to figure out some other way to show the evidence that it's real and that it's going to work, and then you use that to convince people to invest enough money that you can actually essentially buy market share on both sides to the point where you have local liquidity, right? And
Yeah.
you can actually deliver the experience. So it's very hard, but then it could
You
be very
said
powerful.
Yeah, you said something that I never thought about as a founder, which is you go through your own journey of maturing your confidence, right? And so then when you meet the investors, right, that's when you are truly a believer, right? And you're saying, I'm going all in, right? And so in a way, that's sort of how long you need, right, to
But
develop
the
that.
investors is the easy part, right? One would never go to investors before going to customers, right? Like
Right.
nobody would
Should
begin.
shouldn't they shouldn't they
Well, I mean,
probably
that would
they
be nuts. It would be nuts to say, I had a great idea. Let me see if investors want to back it. Like, the only way you know whether your idea is interesting is customers want to pay for it.
right,
Like, right? Like,
right,
how could you possibly assume that you have a good idea if
right.
there's no, you haven't talked to anyone who would be using the product or service
Right.
that you want to create, right? So you've already spent your time, and people generally especially engineers, people who are technical, who think more in terms of innovation on the creation of technology. They often underestimate how hard it is to identify a real burning need and what the real problem is. And generally, it requires a pretty deep understanding of the users. So I'll take it back to mission. I find I'm reluctant to invest in companies that are just like optimizing how much money they can make. To me, that's like investment banks do that, hedge funds, trading, the MIT blackjack team, right? These are not the things I get excited about, and they don't usually tend to grow really large. I want to see founders who really care about some particular group of people and understand them and want to serve them, because this desire, this like impact mission drive, is actually going to give you the strength to talk to enough people sufficiently at length, right, to
Right.
really, really get it. Because it's very hard. It's at least as hard as creating brilliant new technology.
Yeah.
Understanding people that well, understanding who they are, and how they make decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a key skill. And if I know some folks that I now work with who are engineers, they say, well, you go talk to customers and I'm going to just build it. And I was like, no, it doesn't work. As a founder, you need, that's a core skill.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, sometimes you can have co-founders, and one
Right.
of them is good at understanding the customer, and the other is just good at building,
Right.
and
But
that works
one of
really
them
well
has
sometimes.
has to do that really
Absolutely,
well and do it all
absolutely.
the time.
Oh yeah, you cannot outsource it. You cannot like raise money to hire the
Right.
person who will sell your product. That makes no sense. You raise money to hire a team of salespeople who will imitate your sales success and scale
Right.
it. You don't raise money to to figure out what your product should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Well, so going back to the kind of beginning. So let's say a founder has this belief and that they are the right venture backable opportunity. Right now, there are so many matchmaking services or cold outreach to investors and things like that. And from my experience, it just doesn't work. It's just a bad, bad, bad idea to reach out cold. Would you say that from your
There's
standpoint?
always look. There are certainly exceptions. There are some investors who actually prefer that, like Unshackled, for example. When I try to give them a really good warm intro, somebody that's just it's truly not a fit for us because it's like a solo founder that hasn't found a co-founder and they need a visa to enter the U.S. It might be a good fit for them. Something really we think is really great. Not a fit for us. We try to connect them, and they'll actually say, you know what, guys, like we don't do warm intros. We only take cold inbounds. We have a form, they have to fill it out. We have a process because it's more equitable, because we don't want our biases to influence our decisions. So, and they're not the only one, right? And others generally rely on warm interest, but occasionally a really well written email could be the exception. I would say for us, a very small percentage of our investments resulted from cold outreach. Maybe one or two out of like 70 that we made in the two funds, right? So it's not the best way to go in, but um, and most of the time you actually don't need to, because most of the time, it, in the process of figuring out an actual venture scalable business, you're gonna just interact with a lot of enough other people, like all the customers, the other founders of startups, like you'll have to understand why other people who tried this failed, and if you're the kind of person that's building in a small like room and not talking to people, and if you don't have a co-founder who is, right, like you're not going to succeed anyway. Generally, if you are, and especially if you're in an area like an ecosystem, like in New York, Boston, LA, San Francisco kind of ecosystem, um, you will have the warm interest almost without much effort. If you need some help, well, there's accelerators where you can meet other founders. Often it's good to go through a founder that has previously raised money from the investor. Um, but if it seems to you that your big impediment is just getting to them, getting the meeting, and if you were to get the meeting, everything will go great, it's almost certainly an illusion, right? Because if getting the meeting is very hard, then you probably haven't actually done the work to
The
make the
work.
meeting go really well when you get it.
That certainly is very true. And in my experience, I had even situations when I was in San Francisco. I sent someone a cold email, and then they back channel to my existing investor and saying, "Hey, what's wrong with her? Why did she reach out direct?" And they said nothing wrong. She just wanted to meet with her. But anyway, I just I've seen the power of warm intros and how that can get even change the kind of the temperature of the meeting, if you will, right?
Yeah. I mean, people are skeptical to cold outreach, and also you asked about like various kinds of brokers that might connect you.
Mhm.
I mean, no, of course, this is something where we would simply, under no circumstances, read an email from someone if we thought that person was being paid to introduce somebody to us. I mean, that's a really, really bad idea. It exists in the world of like growth rounds and very early stage companies, but
Right.
it doesn't really apply to venture capital. So
Awesome.
don't do that. An investor though might like Y Combinator investing in a startup and a partner introducing you to somebody. Yeah, that could work. That could certainly work. But an investor who passed on the opportunity very rarely might, only if it's like very obvious why it's a better fit for another investor. Um, it's not generally a great idea to ask investors to introduce you to other investors after they decline. Unless there's some very good reason to do
Right.
so, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great segue into the next step, right? Let's say they got a meeting, you feel that it's a fit, and then you get to meet them typically over the phone, right, or Zoom, or in person. How do they? What does a great pitch look like? Is it are folks using slides? Are they just interacting and building relationships? How do you sort of what is this?
I
Um,
mean,
yeah,
there's
process.
different ways to do it. Personally, I'm pretty allergic to someone opening up a PowerPoint the moment they get on a call with me or walk into the room. I just want to have a conversation. Um, Excuse me 1 second. Can we take a quick pause?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm hearing a lot of sounds here, so I think I should move to a place that's quieter
Yeah.
for the sake of your audio quality. Let me see
Okay.
where's the. Yeah, you can. Yeah, there's nothing for me to pause. Yes, to pause. Second.
I'm not hearing any sounds actually.
Oh, you're not, but I am. So maybe. Well, if you really, I don't know. I should. This is a podcast. It's better to be in a quiet room. Where are the damn children? Oh, they're down there.
So now you guys know this is live, so you can see the walkthrough. All right.
Hopefully,
Good hiding spot.
borrow this office. I should have prepared a little better, but I thought that was going to be quiet. But apparently, it's not a school day; it's a holiday today. So anyway,
Yeah. Post Easter.
all right. If you can, what were we saying? What was the question
Yeah.
again?
So we were talking about the pitch, and you're saying you're allergic to folks just popping the
Yeah, right.
PowerPoint, starting
Got
talking
it.
at you.
Okay, so I think different investors have different preferences, and for me, at least, I don't really enjoy someone going into a structured pitch. I want to have a conversation. And I would say that's probably true most of the time for most people in a first meeting, especially when it's like a one-on-one meeting. Um, the pitch, a structured pitch, is really needed when you're going to present to a whole group, like at a partner meeting, fairly far along in the process, when you already have a couple of partners that want to do the deal, and now you get a chance to convince a bunch of people who are not as close to that space, that it's a good idea. So you do need to have one ready. But in the first call, I would have a PowerPoint, and I would start a conversation, like a human conversation, right? Like any other human conversation might start, and get to the subject of your business and try to explain the things that you need to explain, starting ideally with the problem and not immediately with the solution, right? The customer,
Right.
the problem, etc., the team, all these things that you would cover in a deck. And I would have the deck there. And so for hopefully you get engagement and you get an interactive, back and forth and a bunch of questions. And often you'll quickly just skip right to a slide that has some supporting materials for better answering a question, right? So it's also good to have, a short deck and be very familiar with where those slides are, so you can just go right to it without having to search around. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that's great. What have you seen? And certainly you have a decade of angel investing, and now, coming up on 7 years in as a venture investor. What are the common mistakes? What do people do that you just wish they knew better?
Oh goodness. I mean, you mean specifically in pitching a business rather than to
Yeah,
me, almost
or
all the mistakes. Yeah, I think the mistakes happen in the executing of the business, right? And then the pitching just reflects it.
Mhm,
I'm just not a fan of the idea that you can simply improve the pitch and magically
mhm.
things go better. I think you generally have to improve
The
the
pitch.
business, and the pitching naturally is much better when the business is better. There's some exceptions, right? Some people have for some strange reason, can communicate well enough with customers to really figure out a big need, and have trouble communicating that to investors. But I think that would be the exception. Most of the time, people uh,
Yeah.
can communicate well to one or to both groups, right? So, but as far as there's obviously many mistakes that people make in building a business, and I've learned that there's no one mistake that's necessarily fatal. Like, I've seen great CEOs with various severe flaws, right? But they're so great at other things and they're so good at delegating that they can still succeed with their flaws, right? Um, but I would say, if I had to call out a couple of mistakes, one is just the insufficient focus, like the desire to do too many things at once. And even as you tell your story, the desire to like go down every rabbit hole. I mean, ideally, you want to pick like one most clear, most exciting thing and just do that, talk about that, simplify it. It shouldn't be complex, right? There should be a way, just same thing with the customers, right? To get their attention, you have to be respectful. You have to value that the attention is a resource. It's not an unlimited resource. And
Right.
maybe the first sentence you make about your company has to be clear and interesting, and then you get to make the second sentence, and then the third, right?
Right.
Um, so
Earn the right to for the second and third sentence. Exactly.
yeah, well, because you have to, it's like in any conversation, you have to maintain attention, right? If you go rambling about your own thing for too long, you'll lose your audience, right?
Right. Exactly. So, and I think what you said again is very important, because there are a lot of early stage folks who are saying, "Hey, I need to perfect my pitch. I need, pitch coach, pitch practice." But yeah, that's like the 10%, right? 90% is the actual business. And I love how you put it. There are many more business
Well,
mistakes
yeah.
than there are pitch mistakes.
I mean, I want to be clear. The ability to communicate your value proposition in some kind of pitch is critical to building a business.
Right.
It's just that you have to perfect it in order to spend enough time with your customers to have a chance at even figuring out a great business idea.
Right.
That's when you have to perfect it. So by the time you're talking to VCs, you've already have a very good customer pitch, and you simply have to modify it
Right.
to for the investor, where instead of selling your product, you're selling shares in your business, right? But like the main thing that determines the value of the shares is the
Business itself.
level of interest of the customer in your product, right? So
Right.
it'll have to include some part of it. Um, so yeah.
And Simon, I saw in some other interviews you were talking about that team is what you're looking for, right? Great team. Can you talk a little bit about, with all your years of experience, what does that mean? A great team, a great founder.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say it's the only thing in a sense that I'm looking for. I could even whittle it down and say that the great leaders, usually CEOs, like the main founder, right, that is talking to me, right, is the only thing that we base the investment on, because you can derive everything else from that thing. Like, that person finds the great team, like, right, that team implements some great technology.
Right.
If the technology is defensible, like, the team figured out how to make it so, right? If everything is an attribute of the team, and the team is the one kind of thing that you back, because people pivot, people change direction. The particular hypothesis on a go-to-market strategy, right? Um, is more likely to fail than to succeed. So you really want to back the team that's likely to produce other good hypotheses.
Right.
And having one good one is an indicator of that. But what makes a great team? I will say what's most important to me is a leader that has a confident vision of the future. That includes, their business and their solution. They um, have confidence and belief, um, that is going to happen. They're not making a contingent on, let's say, you investing, like, right? They're not saying, if we can raise a round, then, we can do this. They're kind of saying, after we raise this round, we're going to, right? But then you want them to be able to really listen, right? To hear your objections and to actually be interested in why you would not believe some part of their story, and then to be able to answer them really well, right? Or to sort of say that they haven't yet answered them, but they find it like interesting, right? And for instance, if I say, well, what if this thing doesn't go the way you think? I mean, just them saying, no, everything's going to go the way I think it's how it's going to be. That's not what I mean by a confident vision, right? I mean, someone who said, oh yeah, well, if that doesn't go this way, we could probably try this and that other thing, and maybe some other way. And I don't know, let me think about this one. But yet at the end of the day, they think that the thing will go the way they think it'll go, and they believe it's going to get there. So that's the main thing, like this strength of character, confidence, the ability to then convince other amazing people to join them is very important, right? The ability to communicate it, of course, this passion, and then mixed with the willingness to listen, but not to actually do whatever the investor tells them, right? Like if they just sort of say, "Oh, you're right. We'll change everything, with every suggestion," and very quickly you just realize that,
They don't have the
you'd have to
confidence.
you'd have to be running this business
Right.
yourself. You can't invest in it, right? And that doesn't really work. I want to learn something from the conversation, right? Um, so it's subjective, and there's pattern matching, and sometimes we have biases and whatnot, and we make wrong assumptions. So the better investors try to stay open-minded, and likewise listen to the founder and understand how big they'll build business. With the immigrant founders, we find they're more likely to have this like crazy persistence, to not give up along the way when it gets hard. They don't have as many fallback options usually, and they also just have a chip on their shoulder. Like they've kind of internalized that when they commit to their vision and people are skeptical, they have to win. Like there's no option of returning with your tail between your legs, right? And so that's one of the reasons. This perseverance is probably the most critical attribute, right? It's very, very hard, and it's going to get hard along the way. So for the venture fund, like we need 50x outcomes at least for tries to make sense to invest, just because of the structure of it. And so if someone is going to get that far, they have to be like unwilling to take less, and so we've one of the ways we've adjusted our strategy is that we don't want like people who came as little kids or so much, right? Or people who maybe came as adults but already were successful at the time that they arrived. Like we don't want that. We don't want people who are like expats who move, right? Because those people might do really well too. It's just it doesn't fit our thesis. Our thesis is like people who just like went into this like crazy risky adventure with no obvious reason to know that they'll succeed, that most people around them were skeptical of, and they just knew that they had to make it work, and they made it work, right? I mean, their personal immigration, I almost view that as their first startup. Right. So that's another kind of trick to it, right? Every founder we back is a serial entrepreneur, because them having moved in this way is akin to building a business.
Understood. So sounds like you've kind of redefined or narrowed down your definition of immigrant founders as those that effectively just came here to build, right? So they already made the trip to US, or they...
Oh no, they didn't at all have to come here to build, but they have to live here. Yeah, we're not looking at people who are in the process of moving at all. No, it's a filter for us, right? It's people who came without maybe understanding the culture, the language, having a network, having connections, right? And like succeeded to the point of now having a venture backable business, which requires, a lot of evidence of being able to serve or market a customer, right? It requires a lot. And so that's already the accomplishment. And that gives us a kind of a starting point for figuring out what else they have done that might lead us to believe that they can actually pull off this like incredibly difficult attempt to disrupt an existing industry and to build something that large.
Understood. And so for folks who are potentially looking to raise in the US from you guys or other funds, and they are based elsewhere and have a successful business, let's say, I don't know, in France or in Brazil or other places, you wouldn't consider them. The,
No, we only invest in immigrants who live in the United States who came here from some other country. In the first fund, we invested in Canada as well. But yeah, we invest here. We are here. We have to, we lead rounds now. We don't really follow very often anymore. And so we need high conviction, right? We're not writing as many checks. We have 4 people investing, and we're only writing about 4 checks a year, right? So we meet a couple of companies every day. Most of the partners do, right? So um, to get to that level of conviction, right, you have to really spend time with the founder. We generally like to be nearby, physically nearby, even within the US. We're not everywhere, right? um, but if you're based somewhere else and you want to raise money in the US, you could spend some time here, and there are some funds that will invest. It's generally later stage companies, and later stage funds are more open, to international business. The early stages, you might try the accelerator, so you might try early stage funds that are local to where you are. There are actually funds in most parts of the world where you could be building a business.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you, Simone. I know we're coming up on the slot here, but it's been very insightful, very practical. I knew you will give it straight and not holding back, so that certainly materialized. I would love to close off with maybe just one piece of advice that you you think can really help founders.
Yeah, you really want to find a set of customers that you actually care about on a human level, that you enjoy spending time with. You're not going to spend enough time with them if you don't enjoy it, if you don't like them. And try to focus on like one big problem or one major like set of like, I don't know, major joy that you could create in a customer, and find that one thing and lean into it, and find amazing co-founders who believe in the importance of that and in you, and can build it, right? Or if you're building it, have someone do that part.
Right.
That's I think the one thing I would
Awesome.
focus on. Like without the passion, I just think it's very unlikely that you will find the strength to muscle through it.
Yeah, I think that's so important as opposed to trying to engineer a problem starting from the people you really are passionate about serving for a really long time.
Yeah, and then when you sell your idea to them, like you actually mostly just listen. You don't tell them about why your thing is good. You just ask them about what their problems are, and then you follow up and ask them more and more and more about what the real incredibly important problems are, right? And that's what you can talk to 1,000 of them before you build any code or start anything. And people spend a year full time just doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's amazing advice. And thank you, Simone. If you guys were joining us live, please leave your comments or questions. I can't promise Simone will get to all of them. That's on him, but I can certainly get back to you in that chat. And Simone, if folks, are you active on LinkedIn, or where's the best way to follow you for folks?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Twitter, all those things. Email is Semyon at onewayvc.com. All of that works.
Amazing.
So yeah, thanks for having me. And if you want to schedule a different time and ask a few more questions to add to it, I'm happy to pick it up, in the next couple of weeks. But this was